can go ahead, Xavier.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. We have with us Sandpit from RMA of House Marik. Red Moon Angels is what the acronym stands for. He's come here tonight as a representative for House Marik to kind of speak on what his unit and potentially some of the others around Marik view as the potential pitfalls and/or slash solutions of House Marik. So we'll just jump right into it. Sandpit, if you'd like to give a little bit of background on your unit, a little bit of information about it, your activity levels, your size, anything you feel that you would like people to know about RMA.
Sure. Well, Red Moon Angels RMA, the original owner was Road Beer. He's one of the more popular forum personalities from way back in the day, and I actually personally was never anything but Karita all through MechWarrior games, and I just didn't like the atmosphere of the community within Karita here on MechWarrior Online, so I eventually jumped here and then joined RMA with Road, and so I'm the actual owner of RMA here in MechWarrior Online. Road is the actual owner of RMA in general, and we've also got units in Star Citizen and a couple of other games. Basically, we're just kind of a real casual group. In MWO, our membership right now is 13, and active probably about 7. I don't recruit real hard. When we drop with new guys on the Marik TeamSpeak, you get to know people, and then we're real selective about our invites, even though we are real casual. I leave the heavy recruiting to some of the other units like MGA, Seraphim, and a couple of others. We're more low-key in RMA, more laid back, and just more casual overall, I think. That's about it. We've been here since closed beta and played through just about every version of MechWarrior Online there is to play through.
So, can you speak a little bit again? Because this is the first time I've had someone from House Marik. Can you kind of speak to the current construct? And I know FBJ can probably contribute to this from his time with Marik, as to how the Marik's constructed, what the units within Marik feel about each other, whether they coordinate, cooperate well together, if there's any central organization, or if you could just speak to basically Marik's organization for a little bit.
Well, as far as MWO, and we run our own political system here and community warfare with other units using the forums and our TeamSpeak servers and stuff like that, create treaties, alliances, and active border skirmishes and whatnot. The way Marik does it is the loyalist unit leaders sit on what's called our war council, and we all vote. So there's no one or two people that decide the fate for Marik, and I think Marik's, based on what I've seen, because I've dropped with some of the other units and factions, including Mercstar, we are very fractured, but at the same time, we're very organized, and I think a lot of the other factions actually underestimate how big Marik can get when it needs to, because, like I said, RMA, 13 members, FBJ, they've got 20 to 30 on at any given time. Seraphim's the same way, plus a few others. Active membership, we've probably got 100 plus members in our Marik TeamSpeak server, but they all belong to all these different units. But when it comes to community warfare, we have our public drop bays that are set up on our public TeamSpeak, which is free for anybody who wants to come and play.
Sounds very
And we
similar to
use
FRR.
those. And yeah, and if you want, if MGA wants to do some private drops or regimented drops, or they want to have a little more coordination or say so in what their players bring and their drop decks look like and stuff like that, that's what those channels are for. But our publics, we just pick up whoever's coming on and try to get to 12 men, and then we'll drop with them. We've literally had players over the past few weeks that were in their first MechWarrior Online game ever, and managed to pull off some pretty good wins as well. But we don't have any set drop deck rules or anything like that in our public base, and we're basically a big unit of pugs is what we are.
So, is it easy for the Merrick solos to actually find your TeamSpeak? I know a lot of times the coordination for a lot of these units with their solos or their pugs is a lack of people knowing where to go. Do you think, do you have a lot of non-unit visitors on the regular?
No thanks to PGI, because we use our faction chat, which is really the only outlet you have other than the forums. And as with any community, a lot of new players don't bother with the forums, and they don't bother with especially your faction specific content. So they might participate in the new player section and the general discussion, but even then, in your general discussion, all the good stuff, the constructive stuff gets buried by the troll bait and stuff like that.
So here's a question: do you have any suggestions for how you would make it easier for new time Marik players to find people? Like any in-game methods that you think would be really helpful towards helping to organize the Marik side a little bit more?
Just the same things I think most veterans have said for 3 years now. Lobbies. How hard is it to implement a rudimentary lobby system so players have a place to congregate? Put in mutes, put in bans, put in, all the tools you need, so if somebody's a jackass, all you got to do is right-click their name, block them, and not have to worry about it anymore.
So basically public channels, public chat channels that are specifically for each faction where you can see.
Well, just have general chat channels. I mean, there needs to be a lobby system. There needs to be an addition of social tools in this game. They created a completely online multiplayer, player versus player game
without the social aspects.
Every single social tool possible, including simple things like VoIP.
New target acquired.
So you believe? So we actually touched on this a while ago. Outside of game VoIP, you think would be extremely important?
Oh yeah. You need to, even if you don't do VoIP in a general lobby system, some way for players in game to communicate. Because right now there's just no effective way to do that. You're asking players to organize 12 mans and compete in a pretty competitive environment sometimes, and not giving them any tools to do it, and then wondering why they're complaining.
Well, so that actually goes along with something I was bringing along too, and pitch this out as a quick idea since we're talking about the social aspects. One of the things I was complaining about was a lack of unit directories to even know what units are available. A lot of other games you'll have a public page or something where you can read about a unit. They can post their TeamSpeak info. The general unit directories is something that we're missing as well. What would you think about something like that helping players find people?
Oh, I think it would be great. I think all of those kinds of tools would be great. One of the things that Ramses and myself and a couple of others over in America started trying to do is using the Steam tools, because now Steam has some very excellent community building tools and things of that nature in it. But participation is kind of low because it's still really new and unknown.
Because it's not integrated
for the most part.
It's probably an integration issue as well, because it's not integrated into the game. It's not something that someone can find just by pressing something in the game that sends them there. In fact,
Exactly.
Do you think that that would be something that PGI would be willing to explore, perhaps making it so that pressing a button in game would send you to a Steam group of, or do you think that would just break immersion for people?
Steam, anything, something, where if a new player has questions about the game, it is quick and easy for them to find people who can answer it. Because regardless of what this public persona and image that Russ, because I'm going to tell you right now, this latest whole community warfare, Q split, and all that good stuff, it's nothing more than Russ trying to prove that his EP is bigger than your guys' is here in Mercstar, because it's his game.
So how do you so let's talk about that from the perspective of a smaller unit, because the unit queues and the changes to the unit queues are more geared on us. I'm sorry to say, but it seems to be more geared towards punishing Mercstar and 228. But you just described yourself as a unit of organized pugs to an extent, how do you feel that unit queue is going to affect your group where you're not actually super serious, but are otherwise organized?
It's going to be horrible because they're taking away one of our only recruiting tools. It's going to hurt smaller units more than it's going to hurt big units. But now, with that being said, the group queue is going to become a lot more elitist, and it's going to become a lot more competitive, but it's going to become a lot better in the sense that you're going to get better games overall, just like you do with quick play now. But the solo community warfare queue, I feel sorry for most of the people who are going to have to muddle through that crap. Because all they did was paint a big target on the backs of new players. So all of these players that do want to do nothing but grief now have a secluded queue to go do it in.
And there's no matchmaking, so they're not protecting the new pilots.
Nope. And there's no units or experienced players, or
To
there's not going to
deter.
be enough of them to deter that and to help out the new players. Because I'll tell you right now, you can say what you want about units, big units, small units, whatever, but you look across any online game, the communities are built by those players in those types of units. Marik, we donate to our TeamSpeak and we donate to our website to keep it up. So that's free advertising for PGI, that's free advertising for MWO. Every player we bring through there and help get acquainted to MWO sticks around a lot longer than the average new player who comes in, gets his ass stomped for, 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and then moves on to the next game.
See, now that's an interesting point. I don't think we've ever specifically talked about that, and I wanna bounce on that for a couple minutes here, real quick. Groups deterring really elitist solo pilots from griefing and farming other solo players for lack of a matchmaker. So you said you've been around since closed beta. Were you here back before an actual matchmaker was in place?
I think so. I came in right after they doubled the armor, so I believe so. I believe we didn't quite have an actual matchmaker yet.
Okay, because one of our other pilots from before has been here since I think the days of closed beta before there was even a matchmaker. And the fact that there was no matchmaker now, given that was back when repair and rearm was still around, so the games were kind of slow anyways. But because there wasn't a skill separation, it was dominated by your upper level pilots. So basically, you're alluding to the fact that I don't think we've ever actually spoken about this, that's actually potentially what's going to happen now in solo CWQ.
I didn't even think about that, and that's actually a big problem because if you think about it, every solo queue pilot that doesn't want to worry about their tier is now just going to drop into, this unmatch-made place. So does that mean that eventually PGI is going to be forced to place a matchmaker in solo CW in order to balance it out? Because there will be those really high-skilled players who are just going to stomp everybody.
Well, that's part of the misconception about units in general that I've really come to hate over the past couple of months. And it personally pisses me off because, like I said, I personally donate money out of my pocket for Merrick's TeamSpeak server and to help keep a website up, to do nothing but help Russ and PGI, and then to turn around and try and scapegoat units for the problems in community warfare simply because PGI has dropped the ball on their design is shitty.
So one of the things that we talked about, a lot of things that came up in our previous things is one of my main gripes with CW has been it seems to lack an actual idea of what they want. They seem to have been mishmashing a bunch of ideas. Do you get that sense that CW seems to be more of a collection of ideas rather than a focused product with some sort of end game?
Probably, and I've posted it on the forums if anybody cares to, want to claim that this isn't my point of view. I've posted this on the forum for years now. Matter of fact, back when we had the big transverse meltdown, PGI's biggest problem has always been the focus of MWO shifts every time a new player base comes in. They shift for that new player base. We've gone from deathmatch to empty CW, and it's every single time they get going forward on a direction and a vision, it switches, and they just keep. It's I don't know why. Sometimes I think it's poor uh, development. I think it's Russ not knowing how to manage a company, honestly, and I think part of that is also Russ has learned why you never ever go into business with your friends. I just think, yeah, they change their vision every few months. They're
So
chasing
so
whatever audience has just piped up the biggest.
so let's hop on to that vision thing, something you actually specifically wanted to talk about, and you were talking about seasonal community warfare. Would you like to elaborate on that for a minute, and then we can kind of expound on it?
Sure. You guys touched on it on the last roundtable just a bit. Um, and one of the concerns I always hear is, well, do we really want PGI in control of CW, which ultimately is where this would lead to. But if you run community warfare as a season, you could do 3 to 4 seasons a year. So you do it 3 to 4 months, and at the beginning of each season, every player chooses Intersphere or Clan, one or the other. You're stuck on that side of the war for that season. You can switch factions within that side, but you can't jump sides for that season. That right there solves problems with big units, because now there are some big griefing units out there that will do crap like that just to screw with the map. That prevents that. I shouldn't say that it would prevent it, but it definitely mitigates it, because then PGI has quantitative data that they can use and say, okay, we have X number of players on each side, so we know no matter what, we've got this player pool on each side to play with. Now what they do is during that season, maybe once a month or so, follow WWE's format here, one pay-per-view a month, you run a big tournament, kind of like Tukid, and that you run a big event and you recreate one of the battles in the lore of the Intersphere Wars, the clan invasion.
So what's your
Uh,
time limit on the season that you would think? 3 months, 4 months, 2 months? Like, what
I
do you
think I
think would
think
be a good
three
amount
to
of
four
time?
months. I think if you were to get 3 to 4 a year, and you may even decide that that's too many, and then go to 4 or 6 months, and maybe only get 3 or 2 a year. You
Do you
just have to kind of adjust that. And
do you
I
think
now
those
to start it, I would
seasons
keep them short, so then you can see how it works and start working bugs out.
do you think those seasons should encompass the entire map or portions of the map and highlight specific conflicts?
I don't think you need to keep that kind of an adjustment on the map. I think the only thing PGI needs to do in regards to the map is take a look at the statistical data and the numbers of players and say, okay, we need to join these two borders. We need to restrict this border. Otherwise, players in core factions are going to get screwed and not have a good CW experience. And then say, okay, we're going to adapt the old Comstar intercepts they used to do and say, okay, Intersphere, Comstar news report for blah, blah, blah. Davian and Steiner have announced an alliance today to help combat the combined clan threat that now threatens Intersphere. So all mech warriors for these factions are ordered to report to such and such border, and switch the borders for those two factions to match that. You say what you want about PGI controlling the map or whatever, but they already do it. The map's controlled by PGI's algorithm that determines where you go after you lose or win a planet anyway.
Right.
All this does is have them use the actual data at their command to help balance CW overall with it.
Well, let's dig more deep into the seasons thing, because we want to make sure that we're kind of clear about what we're talking about.
Hmm.
What would you assume would be the win condition? How
Well,
would there be alternate map starts, for instance? Would clans start with more territory to make it easier for them, or what if,
that's
for
the
instance, there was
beauty
no
of it.
clan invasion ever? Like nobody joined clan for an entire season. Would that mean that
Well,
nobody
and
could
see, that's the
win?
real beauty of it. You don't have to select just one. If you run multiple seasons in a year, Hell, you can run different battles like that. You can set up the map for different times like that if you want. Then you can actually use timelines to mean something if you want.
We heard it.
You don't have to limit it.
Do you think the Marik pilots that you've spoken with and are around would be open to alternate map scenarios, like non-lore based scenarios, like just to change things up? Because I mean, we've kind of basically rewritten lore as it is, anyways, like 3
Well,
times now.
here's my point of view, and one of the things I keep suggesting on the forums as a MC revenue for PGI, just to touch on, because you mentioned we've rewritten lore several times now, and that's the fact of community warfare. We are the heroes of the inner sphere and the clans. We determine what happens in the inner sphere now. We are shaping everything that happens within community warfare. So every season you can open it up and say, all right, guys, go to town, do what you want. But you could still, like any player that's ever played tabletop and any player that's ever GM'd and ran campaigns and stuff will tell you, you could do all of that and you could still guide a map and the borders and stuff to keep it fairly well balanced. You know, if a faction is getting rolled up, you can roll them up to the point where it's clear they've quote unquote lost community warfare, but they can still participate in a meaningful way and still have some fun, and you don't run all the players out of their faction.
So let's speak on that for a second, because this is something specifically an issue for Marik, Davion, and Lao, and that is the southern houses and no direct exposure to the clan invasion, which is clearly where all the action is. And you know, alternate map scenarios would be, I imagine, part of the problem with Marik, as far as organization goes, is that anytime you want to fight clans, you're basically defending for another house. So there's no real incentive for the house to really unite or pilots to unite for its own purpose. Is that or is that a motivation issue that you suffer? I notice one of the things you want to talk about was ghost drops, and I have a feeling.
2 things. One, the single most common complaint I get from players in Marik when it comes to community warfare is they don't want to sit around doing ghost drops. And the bottom line is, with the way PGI runs community warfare, you can either do ghost drops a lot of times to win a planet, or your only option is to go fight random crap at the clan front. And you don't know what you're going to get. You could care less about the planets and stuff. Most of the players from the southern section of the map that drop in clan area are just dropping there because they can't find a live game anywhere else. But we're not winning anything. We're not gaining anything. We're not obtaining anything. There's nothing to invest in.
Do you?
So our players lose interest.
So here's a thing that we were talking about before in terms of motivation of taking planets and sort of stuff. What would you feel needs to be done in terms of promoting taking territory from even other houses, just so that you can develop your territory? Like, what kind of mechanics would you like to see in terms of taking planets?
To be honest, some of the things Russ has already said that are coming in phase 3 or that they're toying around with sound like some really good incentives as far as, you know, MC earning for planet tags and stuff like that. But it's going to be a very, very finicky thing to balance, because a unit like Mercstar
can get a lot. I was about to ask you, like, because I was about to say that a lot of I've noticed that actually I'm actually really happy that we have you here with a very small unit, because we have been looking at this even in our own discussions. We've been looking at this from a large unit perspective. We've been looking at it from, you know, 228 and as like 30-40 people plus units. That's what we've been looking at it. But from the perspective of a small unit, you know you're not going to rule the world. But there should be gameplay in place that still is where you can look at as a 13-man unit and be like, we have this and we're okay. We own this. We can develop this. Well, this belongs to us.
That's the whole thing when you get back to investment. You know, players, if you give players something to invest in and something to build, they'll do it. Up till now, it's been Pokemech. But you see more and more players are getting bored with that, because players who have been here for 3 years, yeah, I still buy the packs that I like, but I could care less what the next mech coming out is because bottom line is it's going to do the same thing every other mech I have does. It's going to shoot and stomp. But you add in uh, being able
Owning your
to
own
have a
planet.
home planet and being able to, even if you can't own the planet yourself, having rewards for participating in liberating that planet. You know?
So let's ask this from a small unit perspective, because here at Mercstar we don't really kind of have the exposure as a small unit as you do. Do you think, as a small unit in an organization surrounded by much larger units like Seraphim and the other larger Merrick units, that you will actually be able to do enough to qualify to get a tag placed on the planet? Or are you going to be continually squashed by those larger units simply because they can
It's
throw
just
more
like it is
numbers?
now. If you'll look at Merrick planets, 9 times out of 10, it's a Seraphim tag or it's an MGA tag. Um, and, you know, a lot of times those are pug units that are doing that, but Seraphim has enough player base within Seraphim to be able to put together a couple of 12 bands and ghost drop a planet and tag it like that if they want to. Smaller units like RMA and the majority of units within Merrick, not so much. And that's what I
So,
mean by being able to contribute in a meaningful way.
so do you think then that these rewards that they're actually talking about, it's actually going to incentivize units to, even though they're bashing large units, it's actually going to incentivize units to consolidate and grow up to a certain size because they realize they have to have a large
Yeah,
impact.
you'll have to have that to be quote unquote competitive in community warfare. But now Russ has turned around and said, well, we'll cap units. And myself and Mischief and Mystery and even I think Kinetics at some point has pointed out to Russ that's not going to solve anything because all Mercs our units like Mercstar will do is then divide into subunits and you'll still be controlled by the same leadership.
They probably don't know that we actually are already divided into subunits.
Well, that's what I mean. They don't understand what a unit really is. There are so many units within a unit and a faction a lot of times. And there's so many different. That's why I said PGI has no concept of what a unit is. None.
At least in terms of Mercstar, Mercstar is more, and I'm going to touch on EVE Online because EVE Online has this mechanic. We're an alliance. Mercstar is actually an alliance more than a unit. We have many subunits within our unit, some of the size of Sandpit's unit or more, but maybe an alliance structure would be something
Well,
that could be added
now
to the
see,
game.
here's the interesting thing. When you look at how Marik is set up, it's almost identical. As there's not a whole lot of difference in the way Marik is set up. We just happen to be a lore-based faction.
Well, the only
But
difference being is that Mercstar has technically united under one banner, one tag. I think that's the one noticeable difference
yeah,
technically between us
well,
and Merrick.
that's just because that's the way PGI has set up the tag system. Because all of the units in that I've mentioned are loyalist units. They are Marik. So the loyalist units got together and we put together the website and the team speak and said, hey, let's build a little community here. That's essentially how the Marik website, TeamSpeak, all that operates and got started. It's the same principle. It's just on a smaller scale.
So
So if they gave you some ability to actually unite under one banner, you're saying that for the most part, the Merrick units you speak of probably would unite under a common banner.
Oh yeah, they'll unite under Marik.
if they were an official alliance section or an alliance function, you would use it while maintaining your unit names, right? Something like that?
Red Moon Angels is never going to leave Marik.
New target acquired.
Same with Seraph, unless something, you never say never, but unless something just radical or drastic happened.
So that's actually, that kind of goes to the... Now the question is, I think the follow-on to that would be, should the player base be allowed to authorize, like, the Merrick Alliance, or, like, a Merrick alliance.
Yeah, I think that goes back to social tools that PGI needs to include. If they really want to build a community here, let's face it, it's not a single player game. Everything that happens in community warfare is going to be player driven regardless of what PGI wants to do.
I'm trying to think here. How would if PGI wanted to create? Because you said that you've created a sort of council system, and funny enough, Mercs has sort of a council system as well within
It was
itself.
more of a democratic voting.
Yeah, we have a democratic voting, but we have
we listen to our players in our subunits of Marik there, and then the unit leaders will go back and vote based on what they want.
But let's think. What I wanted to think about was, would there be a way for PGI to create a sort of auto-generated council of units based on who's within the game, to kind of control what the faction Marik does or what the faction Wolf does? It basically would somehow automate a vote from all the units or something like that?
Isn't that the system they're already talking about implementing with
sort of, but they're including. I guess that also comes into the solo area, because there will be a lot of solo players. I'm kind of not thinking of them at the moment, although I should be.
Because
so
the loyalist units are going to vote to decide who their, quote unquote enemies are.
But it's going to include a lot of. So how is that weighted? Like.
See, that I don't know.
So that's an interesting thing, because yeah, you've only have 13 people in your unit and you're organized. Does that mean that your vote now counts for more, or you just only counted as 13 people?
I think the way that Russ has been talking, and again, this is another one of the things we were left to speculate, is it sounds like every person is going to have one vote. So 13 people in a unit, you're going to have 13 votes across your unit.
But the interesting thing here is that there's so many people within these factions who probably don't care or know what's happening anyway. It's like the people who are funneled into the game via the call to arms system. They're just there. They're not really...
They're just cannon fodder. I'm sorry. That's the system PGI has set up for them. Hit the call to arms button and you're likely going to get rolled over by a 12-man.
So the question becomes, how do you... Should it be units that decide where the attacks are happening? And in that sense, how do you decide which unit gets more of a vote, or does each unit get an equal vote? Like, this is a kind of a system that would be really hard to think about.
Do you really... The other question that becomes, okay, even if you're an organized unit, do you really want some of the dedicated griefing units out there to have a say-so?
So in other words, you wouldn't be able to vote unless you had declared loyalist. Something along those lines.
PGI is said they're going to set up, I believe. That's how they're going to set it up.
Right, but I mean, technically anyone could walk in at any point in time. Like a merc could all of a sudden declare loyalist
unit. Yeah.
Yeah. But so I guess I'm kind of leading off your point there. It would be whoever declared loyalist units, and if we go with seasonal CW, whoever had declared loyalist at the beginning of the season, and make it an unbreakable contract for the length of whatever that season is.
I would go for that.
So here's the question.
But I'm a loyalist unit as well.
Yeah, let's talk about this from the perspective of a merc, Xavier. Would it bother you, Xavier, as a mercenary group, since Mercstar is essentially mercenaries, do you think our unit would, if loyalists are the only things that had a say, would you think we would just pick a unit and go loyalist, or pick a faction and go loyalist, or do you think we would be okay with being a merc and then like how do you...
I think it would depend upon like the roles that mercs were contracted to perform, because and this is ultimately like the feeling I get, and maybe Sandpit can talk about this from a loyalist standpoint. I often feel like whether you're loyalist or another merc unit, like mercs aren't necessarily viewed in a positive light. It's almost like get out of our house, get off our planets, we can handle our own. It's like we were meant to be augmentation for different aspects of the game, but nobody wants the augmentation.
And that's the problem. Like, I don't feel... The thing that I feel is that there's no way... From what I'm hearing, there's no way that we're going to be able to get recognition or a lasting imprint for what we've done. Someone hired us to do this, but nobody will really know that we did it. And because getting your name out there as a merc should be an important thing.
I think, and this is the thing too. I don't know how they're setting up the whole contract system. I really think that merc contracts should really be pay for performance contracts, not join for a week and fight whatever fight they voted
Exactly.
for. Like literally, someone contracts us for North American to take a planet. If we take a planet, we get paid. If we don't get paid. Like it's literally that simple. And then that incentivizes people to actually perform, and it protects units from getting their coffers raided just for the sake of asking someone to come help them.
Let's say, but what about a small merc group? Say a 12-man of mercs. What are they? Like, how did they make their name known as that small unit of mercs? How are they given missions to, like,
You know what?
if
They
Sandpit
do
wants...
it the
Go ahead.
same way any other small business does it. They go to our public TeamSpeak servers, drop with us, build up a reputation. There's a couple of
Well,
merc
I'm thinking
units right
in-game.
now that I guarantee you, when we're able to actually hire mercs to do something, I will hire above all others because I've got to know them on the forum, in the community, and on our TeamSpeak server. Vice versa, there's some merc units out there won't ever see a dime from House Marik, as far as I'm concerned, with me being on the War Council because they came on and they were dicks.
But I'm
So
thinking
that's
in-game things, like
Yeah. So
in-game
so
functions.
if we're talking in game, and again, this is another speculation on our part because we don't really know how this is going to work. We're assuming that these tagging and objectives that Russ talks about paying people for is only going to be for the front running units. What if you were the second most important unit in taking a planet one night? What recognition do
Exactly.
you get? I mean, we don't have graduated tags or graduated rewards from what it sounds like. I mean, maybe something along those lines to allow secondary and tertiary
Well,
recognition.
now let me ask you this: is from a big unit like Mercstar's perspective, would the way you approach community warfare change if you had a definitive start date, end date, and goal?
Uh,
Because now, if they ran a season and then at the end of the season you culminated it with the Battle of Took, and that determined which side Intersphere clan won that season of Community Warfare, and then go ahead and let that side drop against PGI for Terra, and there's your winner for that season of Community Warfare. Would that change a big unit like that?
I think that depends on, see, the season-based format. I think there needs to be some definitive rewards that would make it worth it to, because let's say you set up the rewards, those rewards have to scale to the fact that we have 400
Well,
people,
now
or
here's how you implement a system like that. They already do that with the Battle of Took event, right?
right, they have the stats.
So once a month, they run an event like Took, and like I said, just recreate one of the ancient lore battles, and that's how you invest smaller units and get them more involved and have stuff like that more often. And then you could run even smaller events every week for community warfare. Smaller stuff like that. Just keep scaling it down until you find a good spot for the big units and the small units
Well,
and the solo players.
here's a question for you then. How do you think it's important that your unit have an equal chance to win as Mercstar? Or would you feel that a large unit should have more chance to win, or should a smaller unit have equal chance? Like,
I
how do
I
you
think
win, and what does
every
that
unit
mean?
should be rewarded for their contribution,
I
however
see.
big or small it is. I don't think it's something that's as simple as saying unit size or anything like that. Because like I
Now,
said, in Merrick, when you see a 12-man dropping in community warfare, chances are it's 3 or 4 different units in that 12-man.
so in other words, so let me ask you this. So if everyone should be rewarded for their contribution, should people also be punished potentially for their
Failures?
damage, their failures as well? So like a win-loss percentage style,
Well, now
like
here's the other
impact,
side of
positive,
that. You're
negative
talking
impact.
about uh, merc contracts and being able to reward better merc units and get more recognition for being a good merc unit. why not implement a system like that for the mercs? And the better your win percentage, the better you perform, the bigger bonus you get from the MRBC on your contract.
I think there shouldn't be any negatives, by the way, Xavier, because I think punishing people in a game for not performing well is, while would make sense, I think it's much easier and simpler to just reward people who did well rather than punish people who didn't
But
do as
that's
well.
that's where we get to, you know, if you do a graduated reward system like that and you implement something to where, okay, you're dropping in community warfare as Merc Star, your contract said this. If you do that contract and you do it well and you win more than you lose, then it tracks that stat and you get bonuses on your performance.
Well, see, I'm gonna go to actually a sport here for a second. I'm gonna draw a little bit of an analogy. It's hockey, which a lot of our Canadian people will be able to associate with.
I played hockey all through high school, just FYI.
So in hockey, there's a stat, a plus-minus statistic. Basically, it tracks if a goal was scored for your team while you were on the ice versus a goal was scored against you or against your team while you were on the ice. Basically, it tracks your positive, negative influence, potentially, on the scoring within the game itself. It's a pretty effective stat because a lot of people with high plus minuses get recognized. They didn't necessarily contribute to the goal or the assist that actually scored the goal, but they had a positive impact of preventing a score. Yeah. So if you talk like a plus minus, and this is why I was kind of going down this route of not necessarily punishing negative play, just tracking the plus minus impact, and then you actually end up with a, I don't want to say like an in-game rating or ranking, some type of like.
Well, they already do that with the PSR and the old ELO system, so just apply it to units, and like I said, give the better performing units a bonus.
Oh, well, you could track it into players. You're talking about individual players.
I'm talking about individual players. I'm talking about going beyond even just units. I'm talking about on a per player basis.
That actually,
because that would
actually use that for matchmaking.
Because that would actually allow, you know, something like, and it's something like in a larger unit, and I'll speak from a larger unit perspective. We can't always drop with all of the players that are dropping for our unit, so we don't actually know some of the win-loss rates of some of our other groups. So like what I'm thinking is if you had like, even within a unit, if you had like plus minus stats or something to kind of tell you like who's your most effective players, who wins the most, who loses the most, who maybe is, you know, hurting you, who needs a little bit more help, stuff like that, like in-game management about your players.
Now, unit stats for unit management, I would love to see stuff like that.
I feel like that's some data that they could easily capture and contribute. That goes back to the social aspect.
I did play devil's advocate with that. Like, that does sound good, but you know, at the same time, that's going to help promote a level of elitism that you might not want to otherwise see.
Look,
you got to be careful about that sort of stuff.
Say what you want, but there's always going to be some elitism in any kind of competitive performance. I mean, there's always going to be the last kid picked in a pickup game. I mean, that's just back to life, man.
Yeah, it is. I'm just thinking along the lines.
Not every unit is going to run like. I guarantee you, RMA wouldn't change the way we recruit and treat our players or anything like that just because of a system like that.
I think it's, but mostly for me, I think there's got to be the system. If it does track, it has to be in a way that is able to be spun mostly positive. Like it's to say that someone is good, but not able to specifically say this person is bad. You know what I mean? Because you get into that, and you might run into a little bit of issues.
You can even use it, because now here comes the other side of that. Now, part of what Russ has said is that the whole MC generation, that will be up to the unit leader to disperse to the players.
This is true.
So yeah, so this would actually allow them to know something about their players, to know who deserves potentially more than someone else.
Exactly. If you're going to have a reward system, then
you're going to have to have some kind of merit-based system to know. That's actually a very good point. I never thought about merit-based rewards. and we have no real way to track that. We just, assume.
Acquired.
It's weird.
I tell people all the time, your win-loss ratio is the worst stat you can think about in this game, because the bottom line is, unless you're in a 12-man every single game, you don't know who the hell you're going to be playing with next drop.
Oh no, it's my win-loss is basically my win-loss and kill death are things that I don't even pay attention to because I've done it all in solo queue. So I just don't even pay attention to what it is. Because I know people who tell me they've got 5, 6, 7 kill death ratios. It's because you spend your entire time in a group with other people, and then you kind of just pooping on people who are not as good. So.
But see, that's also part of the problem with units and groups in general in MWO, because, like I said, when Russ goes on Twitter and he says, a big unit is in trouble, and stupid shit like that. You're the president of a multi-million-dollar company. Your other customers are listening to you. If you go out there on your public social media and scapegoat big units, guess what? It should be no surprise that the rest of the community has this negative image of what units are, which is why I was so happy to hear you guys were doing these roundtables, and I've been pushing for more of this stuff from the community in general, because the perception of units and pre-mades and groups has been vilified and scapegoated since we came into open beta, honestly, truly.
All right, so let's move on here, because I think we've kind of covered the group sizes and relative and kind of how we feel about CW. And I know you mentioned ghost drops being a problem for the southern houses. And we were talking about activity levels down there. What do you think potentially is something specifically centered for those southern houses that can be done? Because I know activity levels are pretty low, and they seem to, at the beginning of new seasons, it'll like surge momentarily, and then it'll kind of piddle out because they just, you get tired of your turret drops. And
what can you give the southern houses to do? Something that doesn't involve the clans, that is just as engaging.
That's where the whole suggestion of PGI start, treating this as a campaign and playing more of the role of a GM, because then they could turn around and say, okay, well, Marik's participation is dwindling off a bit, and they've been getting nothing but ghost drops. We have all the knowledge and the statistics to be able to show this, so what are we going to do? Oh, well, how about this? Steiner and Marik have announced a temporary alliance to battle blah, blah, blah. And now they share borders, so now they've opened up a brand new attack border for the Marik house, or Liao, or Davian, because I'll tell you right now, most of what happens in the South is based on what those three factions do.
So do you think Marik, Davion, and Lao, and I know you can't speak necessarily for Davion and Lao, do you think they would be okay with being dictated to from that standpoint of basically being told who their alliances are?
This, and like you said, I can't even speak for all of Marik, so I definitely can't speak for other factions, but anytime this conversation has come up, and that's with some Davian players, that's with some Liao players, that's with a lot of Marik players I drop with, it's been met with positive reception. Everybody's, yeah, that's actually sounds like a good idea. And it's very rare I run into anybody that once it's explained and you kind of go into the details of what you could do with it, and you get past the whole stigma of, well, I don't want PGI dictating, then they realize, you know what, so without being able to speak for anybody but myself, it's very rare I meet anybody that doesn't like the idea, and that includes some other merc units, grave walkers, and I mean, I drop with a lot of different people and a lot of different units in this game.
So basically, the micromanaging that currently goes on to the game that nobody enjoys, basically what we're alluding to is this is a kind of micromanaging that someone could basically play around with, and you feel that most factions and units would basically fall in line once the actual effect takes place and see the positives within it.
Yeah, and here's the other side to that. It's a lot of work within the community, on the forums and in faction chat, to try and coordinate between Davey and Liao and Marik sometimes, just so we can have an active CW for our players. And it shouldn't be on the players to have to do that. That should be PGI's responsibility. And then if you want to take it a step further and micromanage your unit, you can. You have the tools to do that.
I'm just thinking. I'm just thinking if there's a way potentially that they could put that same power, like everything you speak of, instead of micromanaging, because that would almost be a full-time job potentially of like setting up these scenarios and how long do they last and how effective are they. And if you could take this like voting system we're talking about
Well,
and
now
your
doesn't
alliance.
Eve have a player council
Well, the
of some
Eve's
kind?
player council is mostly geared towards development of content in the game. They don't actually talk about
But
what's
couldn't
happening
you
on the
take
map.
the same concept and implement it into a community warfare type situation?
Well, not really, because the Eve Council is they have a very large player base to draw from, and then the council members that they have are only allowed to be on the council for a couple months, and then they must be immediately replaced. We don't really have the population to do that, and like I
Well,
said,
isn't
most that
that,
council
but isn't that what they're planning on doing with the whole loyalist units get to vote for the attack borders and stuff?
kinda.
Kind of, sort of, but that's more, again, that's more of a popular vote thing. The whole purpose for the player council in EVE Online is more for like game balance
Development,
and,
yeah.
and
Well, I understand
development.
that's what it's there for, but what I'm saying is could you adjust and use that type of platform? Because what you're talking about, the players have to be able to coordinate, the players have to be able to communicate, and the players have to be able to congregate.
Well, you could for taking that into let's look at the council thing for a second. Perhaps you could do a public vote within the factions to elect people within the factions to
There you
control
go.
X, Y, and Z unit to an extent.
With a limit of
with
no
a
more
limited
than
up,
one per unit or something.
well,
Well,
you
you
have
could
to make
also
the council large enough so that it wouldn't be influenced by, say, some guy on Twitch with 30,000 viewers trolling and getting all these people to
right.
log in and vote for him to make him. I'd say you'd have to have probably. I think it'd be easy to say 10 to 15 people with who would be voted in by the population of this
Now,
group to
if you
control.
ran it as a season, couldn't you open it up for the first couple weeks, the voting up for the first couple weeks, and say, okay, vote your leaders for this season?
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. That would
You
actually.
know, the only problem with that, and I see, and this is just a symptom of just online games, is once people are voted, what's actually to obligate them to actually work with the other people to actually achieve anything?
Give them
Well,
the
you could
ability to be
still put
voted
in a
out.
system where they could be voted out.
Actually, that makes sense. Is you would vote them in, but then every week they would have a performance review, and
Yeah.
you could just say, I want to keep this leader. I don't want to keep this leader. And if
The
somebody gets
bottom line
voted
is
out,
PGI has to decide how much of this they want the players to be responsible for and how much they want to control.
Destroyed. New target acquired.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out if something like that would be easier leaving in PGI's hands instead of trying to implement.
No.
Like the system might almost be more complicated to implement than just letting PGI micromanage
Yeah, but if
the
they would
effect.
put it in the players' hands, we would have had community warfare 2 years ago.
it's entirely possible. I mean, there's already technically that league that is set up that basically does community
Well,
warfare.
look at the history of Mech Warrior. Look at all the leagues. Look at all of the communities. Look at all of that players have built over the last 30 years. Players would have already had a functioning community warfare up and running.
So basically, I guess what we're saying is, when considering the construction of community warfare, basically make it as free form and free flowing as potentially possible.
Well, have any of you ever played Mega Mech?
I have actually never played Mega Mech, no.
No.
We had a server for Mech Wars, which was basically a recreation of the Inner Sphere War server we set up or Mega Mech, not long after McWiz coded and created the game.
Target destroyed.
And it has
New target
every
acquired.
piece of logistic, economy, diversity of missions and objective types that we have ever talked about
New target
coded and
acquired.
implemented. Not all of them would translate, I promise you, but they would give you a good idea of what could be done with a player base that just wants to play and have a campaign.
Target
Okay,
acquired.
we've been talking a lot of top-down stuff from the kind of like eye in the sky type view of community warfare, but I actually want to get your opinion on the mechanics of community warfare, because we discussed this with, you
They're
know,
horrible.
like, okay, so how do you feel about the maps of community warfare? How do you feel about the way the game is played currently? Do you think that it needs to be redone? Like, is it okay and can be fixed, or how do you feel about the
I
current
think
mechanics we have?
everything from the map on needs a heavy overhaul.
So you think that the maps currently as they are unsalvageable?
I think they work. I don't think they're the best, but I also think based on Polar Highland that we're going to get some much higher quality maps very soon.
Mm-hmm. So
I think one of the easiest things they could do with the community warfare maps we have now is simply either do away with the out of bounds on them or greatly expand it.
because you feel like we've talked about this before actually. I personally believe that Polar Highlands is to the scale and scope that a community or that a CW map should actually be. That there
At
should
least.
be more in that type of map design for CW, where the lane system, you don't. How do you feel about the lane system and stuff like that?
It's, well, PGI keeps complaining that CW's a ghost town, but they deny that the real reasons for stuff like that are ghost drops and boring map play, because it is a lane system. People didn't come to MechWarrior Online to play a MOBA.
That's
And that's
actually a very
exactly what
interesting point.
the
I've
lanes
actually
are like.
I've never drawn the correlation between a lane funneling system and basically the same thing that a MOBA generates
That's exactly
online.
what I've been seeing from the beginning. We just have the MOBA without the creeps, and honestly,
Yep.
we need the creeps. Like, if you're gonna do it, we need the creeps. We need the tanks that are just rolling down the lanes, so we have something to blow up while we're walking into the base. So the tanks need to be able to fight each other or something. Because if you're gonna give
Do
us
you know what
lane,
a scout? What do your scouts do? Not to get into your specific strategies for
we don't
community
have
warfare.
We don't
scouts.
have scouts.
When there's
There
no
you
reason
go.
for them.
There you go. You know what? I don't even run a light in my community warfare drop deck anymore because there's not any point. I have a crab that I use as a scout because scouting equates to I'm going to run up here and see which door they come in, and then I'm running back because we know exactly what lane they're going to take after they come through that door.
So you feel that the mechanics are just not there. Like, despite
I
all the
feel it's
world
poor
building.
map design.
So would you play? So what you're saying is that you would play the overhead
Give me
metagame with even though you believe the mechanics are not particularly fun on the ground.
You know what makes MechWarrior Online fun? You know what makes any game fun? The people you get to drop with and hang out. At least a multiplayer game.
Thank
You know
you.
what?
I
MechWarrior
salute
Online
you,
is a
sir.
fun game for all of its faults. It's BattleTech, it's big stompy robots. So I would have fun playing this even if we were still playing on the original maps with the original mechs. I'd be bored, I wouldn't play it as often, but I would still enjoy it.
See, that goes to something that I've been saying for a long time, and based on what you're saying, I have a feeling you'll probably agree with me on this, is that right now, unit membership to some degree is almost vilified in conversation, when in reality, it should actually be incentivized at some point in
Yep.
time.
I agree wholeheartedly, but that goes back to the whole Russ and PGI and scapegoating, quote unquote big units for people having bad community warfare experiences. It's not big units causing it. It's not any units causing it. It's not players causing it. It's poor mechanics and design.
All right, so let me jump off of that for a second, since we're talking about unit membership. Something actually one of our viewers brought up and wanted to comment about unit coffers. Right now, it's kind of a black hole, and they exist for contract cancellation, and that's it. Which, from a loyalist standpoint, you never do. So basically, they're a moot point for you. What do you
100,000.
feel? What do you feel some of the functions potentially could be, specifically for loyalists versus
Why?
mercs?
This is another thing that you could do to help incentivize big units and stuff like that without hurting small units, and that's you give, the management tools in leadership allows you to dictate who can see it, who has access to it, and all of that. So you set it up to where it becomes your unit bank, and you can buy unit mechs, and or better yet, you can use it to buy paint and camos and stuff for the players in your unit. When you get new players in and you've got a drop deck that they can access so that they're not stuck in trial mechs, all that kind of stuff. That's what I think it should be. It should be for the units themselves.
That was something that Sater brought up before about like unit available mechs, like for a limited period of time, because obviously, PGI has to make money, and you don't want to allow units to completely bankroll new players just for the sake of giving them every mech they'll ever pilot.
Right. Well, and you could do it on a rental period. You could do it to where even if they have access to the mech, it's not theirs. Kind of like they do trial mechs. You could have unit trial mechs.
The unit trial mechs.
But
So you could
only
be
to be
certain
used
as a
in
unit.
CW. But only to be used in CW.
Yes, only for CW, nothing else. That's the other thing I think a lot of people get the misconception of. A lot of ideas that get tossed around on the forums and stuff, even if they're in general discussion, are centered around the idea that they'd be used in CW. Stuff like this, it's quick play. You're on your own, man. You want to play quick play, that's fine, but you're in quick play.
What I would love to see is I would love it if, like, here's the thing that this is a touchy subject, I think, because a lot of people want to play the robots that they buy wherever they want to play it. But let's be honest, we're way too rich for the pilots that we are in this game. It doesn't make sense that I own 70 mechs and can pull them out left and right with no problem. Honestly, like, my Mad Dog, for this duration of the season, I should probably only be able to field 3 or 4 mechs, and those mechs should be super important to me because I did something within that season to get access to them. What would you think of perhaps making it so that planets could have factories, and some planets can build XY mech or something like that?
Like I said, this is that kind of stuff. That is all stuff we had coded into the Mech Wars server for just those reasons, because they offer a lot of depth and a lot of viability, a lot of different kinds of syncs for players. They give you a sense of ownership.
But are we talking about two potentially different mech stalls, basically a unit stall and then the personal player stall? Because
yes, you would have to have it, but that goes.
That's how you'd have to have it, because then if you're only building dragons and I don't own a dragon, well, I can't drop in a dragon unless it's provided to me.
Well, here's an idea. And this kind of goes back sort of into EVE Online territory. You come into you get paid X, Y, and Z by your faction for winning or performing well, and the mechs are provided to you by manufacturers. We, as Mercstar, could perhaps take X, Y, and Z planet and manufacture X, Y, and Z mech and sell it back to solo mercenaries or solo whatever. And they would have to buy those mechs, and we would gain money for that. And there's a whole bunch of marketing mechanics that you could put in. And then, of course, the unit over there would see that we own the Mad Dog factory in this sector, and they really want to build Mad Dogs without having to pay us, so they take the Mad Dog planet. Stuff like that.
I think you're getting beyond PGI's capability.
It takes I mean, these are things, but this is what I'm talking about, though, is that
that's like
CW.
Beta 7
yeah, but that's my problem, though, is that CW currently is designed with an amalgam of ideas without a like an entire. They need to rethink it all from the ground up, and they need to be able to incorporate these things as part of their ideas. They need to hire someone who does this kind of work, who
They
does
need to
this
hire a project manager.
well, project
Because
manager to keep them on track, but they need to hire a a strategic game designer. I don't know, contract Firaxis or something. You know, there are people out there who what their job is to basically make a strategy element to this game from the top down. What is the strategy element? And then they can start working on the underneath game mechanics because they have
call
terrible
Blizzard.
call Blizzard, call somebody, but they're kind of just putting ideas together, but it's not going to be till CW Phase 9 that we might actually see these things being linked together
Nobody's
in a
going
way.
to care by then.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna throw something out there because I was watching Sater's chat over here and somebody had a problem or an observation too that we've potentially talked about as well. What do you think about the current rate at which planets can change hands? Too fast, too slow, too little work to take a planet, too much work to take a planet?
I think it's get rewarded too much for ghost drops. I can make 370,000 for a ghost drop.
Well, ghost drops should probably not exist at all as they
Well,
are. They should simply
did
just
any of you play multiplayer 3025 when EA was doing it several years ago?
no.
No, I didn't.
They had a system that was similar to the ghost drop. You didn't win any kind of money for it, but as soon as you had your team on that planet trying to conquer it, you would start leeching percentage ownership of it. But you wouldn't win any C bills or experience or anything. You would just leech percentage of the planet.
Well, see, you've got an interesting perspective on ghost drops because from the perspective of Mercstar, if we see ghost drops as a way to prevent people from taking a planet, because honestly, when it comes down to it, with the current gameplay that we have, if we don't want you to take X, Y, and Z planet, we're actually better off just letting you ghost drop, because we believe that you'll simply get bored or just not be able to do it fast enough.
Well, and that's the other side of it. The ones who do get bored aren't the ones who are ghost dropping for
Online.
CW. They're ghost dropping to farm C bills. Those are the ones that are going to keep ghost dropping anyway.
All systems nominal.
When we get in situations like that, I'll be honest with you, I'll do the drop calls and stuff when we get in, but we've got another group lead that's going to handle launching and all of that good stuff because I'm watching Netflix in between drops.
See, that's an interesting point of view because our assumption has always been that people just quit after a while, and we've seen it kind of to some degree. If you know, and it's not so much clan versus IS border because if clan attacks IS and IS attacks clan, there's always pugs that show up. Because that's how people get drawn in because of the call to arms, which is another problem we should probably talk about. But like when you're IS versus IS and you have no one else, and you know that you're the only IS house dropping on that border,
You'll just ghost drop because you have to.
You'll just ghost drop because you have to, or if someone's attacking you, you'll just let them ghost drop because, you know what?
Exactly.
You can probably take it faster by attacking than they can by their attack.
Target destroyed.
And that's not the way it should be, but that's exactly how it plays out for us a lot of times because it has to. Because now the smaller factions in general, we don't have the players to be able to put up a front 24/7 anywhere in the borders. We have to get on the forums. We have to talk to other unit leaders. We have to set up times and days and switch our borders and stuff just so we can find active borders to have some fun in for our players.
Heat level critical.
So what do you think about the any IS can defend any other IS, any clan can defend any clan, and the fact that that's only isolated to really 3 house borders?
Like I said, I think they need to start looking at their map a lot closer and paying more attention to what's happening on it, because that's how they can control it.
Okay. Well, speaking as a loyalist, here's another idea that based on what you said so far, I feel like that you're not going to like this idea very much.
You'd be surprised.
So, I've said that PGI kind of has a population problem that they're not admitting, that they're not, that they think the game's going to get bigger than it actually is going to. And I think that the
I'll
current
agree with you.
CW that we have is meant for a larger population than they're ever going to have. Would it upset you as a Merrick loyalist if CW was pared down to clan versus IS? And would that, like, how would you feel about that?
I don't think it would work because I don't think enough people would like it, because now that is getting a little too limiting in player choice, I think. Me personally, I wouldn't care, but I don't think it would work, and I think it would defeat the purpose, because I think people would just leave in general.
Well, okay.
Because a lot of the draw outside of BattleTech is clan, and there's certain units and factions, and there's certain lore that is a lot more popular outside of the BattleTech universe because of the novelizations that was performed, years back, and you have a lot of fans from that era. I don't think the community in general would like it. I don't think it would be popular enough. I think enough people would leave for it where it would defeat the purpose.
So how do we combat low population? How would you go? Do you feel that there's a population problem? I should probably ask
that. I think MWO survives because it's a free game, and you always have just enough new players coming through checking out a new free game to keep it afloat, along with a very, very loyal core fans that spend a lot of money on this game. But I don't think it's anywhere near as big as it could or should be.
So do you think player retention is an issue?
Yes. For all the reasons we've talked about from the moment we started talking tonight, actually.
All right. So in that case, so basically, you are of the mind that CW is important enough that it should get more resources because you believe that's what's going to cause retention. What if CW were a game mode that was fun, fleshed out, and actually finished? That would be more important to you than another mech pack. You feel like? Do you believe that would make?
Oh yeah. But now, to support that train of thought, I'll ask a simple question. Do you think if Blizzard announced tomorrow that you were going to be able to play StarCraft 3 as a first person, but still keep the intergalactic war element and the RTS? Because that's what the Intersphere map could be, is the RTS section of being able to employ all these different political strategies and stuff. So do you think tomorrow, if Blizzard announced that, people wouldn't go through the roof for it? Because that's essentially what PGI has the opportunity to do with this game, if they really wanted to.
We're just talking about heading the opposite direction. Instead of going from top down, macro to micro, we're talking about going from micro to macro.
Mm-hmm. But you could, that's the thing. What is community warfare?
It's the future of the game. That's what it is.
But what is it right now? What is community warfare?
It's a deathmatch simulator.
You have no goal. You have no end. You have nothing but the community doing whatever the hell they want with it, which is fine. But
it's amazing that they have as many people as they have doing what they've done. I've actually said this before. I'm fascinated by the fact that Mercstar has done all it's done with absolutely no incentive to do what it's done. Because there's no incentive. The amount of planets we've taken, all that sort of stuff, because I joined... It amounts to nothing, but they did it anyway. And so there are lots of units in CW, yours, mine, 228, whatever, doing so many things with zero incentive to do it.
Other than we enjoy the game.
I don't even really enjoy community warfare that much. I just, like I said, I play for the people. I play because it's fun to play with the people.
So
we play for our communities.
So that's actually what I wanted to bring up and kind of where I was going with this. And it's something that I've tweeted about a lot, I've posted on the forums about a lot. You know, we talk about having a player retention issue. You know, if we had all the players that left over the years, our player count would be 3 times the size that it is right now and wouldn't even have half the issues that we have. And this is where I think, and maybe you can speak from Marik units, that player retention within a unit is much easier than a player retention for players who never join units, simply because of the social aspect and the social ties.
I've said the exact same thing that you're saying now, and we touched on a little bit earlier. It's the we play for our communities. We make friendships. We form relationships with people that we meet online and we drop with, because you know, if you, especially if you play the game a lot. I mean, if you play 2 or 3 hours 2 nights a week, right? And you play in a unit. That means for 2 to 3 hours for several nights a week, you're sitting on a TeamSpeak server like we are now, shooting the shit, hanging out, talking, playing a video game. It wouldn't matter what the video game is, the backdrop, because we all play more than just MechWarrior Online. The video game is interchangeable. The community is what's not.
So where I'm going with this is that not only is it in the game's best interest for communities to be incentivized, it's within PGI's financial best interest to incentivize people to join these communities because of retention, because retention leads to, you know, more cash flow, which leads to a longer surviving game.
I'll put it to you like this. How many people follow you on Twitter?
Actually, I don't tweet a whole lot. I think I have like 70 or 80 or so.
70, 80. I think I've got about 25, 30. That means every time, and the vast majority of those people on my Twitter feed do not play MWO. Every time I send out a tweet regarding MechWarrior Online, that is free advertising for PGI. Every time you send out a tweet, that is free advertising for PGI. Every time I send out a message in my social media and stuff like that to try and recruit for Red Moon Angel, it's free advertising for MWO, which is free advertising for PGI. If PGI would spend half the energy they do in chasing their tails into building an actual community, they would have a hell of a game, and it wouldn't have anything to do with how good or bad their game is.
Much prefer a large full player.
Blizzard could go out and create the I'm going to take a Deuce simulator tomorrow, and they would sell copies of it, not because it's a good game, because they have a community and a following.
So along these lines, and I think we basically, I'm just going over all your points. I think we basically covered all the points you wanted to talk about, except for one last one I think I wanted to bring up, and it kind of goes along the lines of the unit and community warfare in and of itself, and that's something we've talked about, is gating community warfare, because it is late game content, at least in our view it is. I know you mentioned like cadet bonus as the initial gate. What do you think a gating system would look like? Well, and do you think they should be encouraged to potentially join units before dropping NCW?
I think the cadet bonus needs to be reworked completely. So when I say cadet bonus, it includes that as well. I think the cadet bonus needs to be extended to about 50 games minimum, and I think X amount of those games needs to be dropped solo, X amount of those games needs to be dropped group, and I think at the end of that cadet bonus, the players should get a lump sum of, 20 million seat bills, whatever, just as an example, and their choice of 1 deck and 2 free mech bays.
So like a finish line reward, not an incremental reward.
Yep.
It's not bad, actually.
And once they complete their cadet bonus, they can drop in community warfare.
See, the limit that Xavier had in his mind for community warfare, what we broke down among all the talks that we've had, we've basically limited ourselves to: you cannot drop in community warfare unless you own 2 of your own mechs. at minimum, essentially, that are equipped and
Well,
ready based on whatever faction you've chose. You need to own 2 clan heavies or 2 inner sphere heavies or assaults or something like that.
People
I
dropping
would,
in 4 trials is ridiculous.
yeah, I would be fine with that as well. And if they would rework the cadet bonus like that and give players a free mech, I would
And they're
also
20
include
million,
where
you
they
would
have
have
to
it.
run X amount of games in each weight class, like 4 or 5 games in each weight class to be able to graduate, so they get experience in each weight class of mech. But um, if you give them a free mech and enough money to outfit it, then all they've got to do from that point on is play a few more games to buy their second mech. And they've already played, 60, 70 games. They've got a little experience under their belt. They know how to customize a mech.
Warning, incoming.
Along those lines of like the cadet bonus and the rewarding, and I know this is something we kind of briefly touched on, and this is something that, I'm probably going to say probably everyone in the game has made this mistake at some point in time. And that is early game money mistakes.
Yes.
I bought a
We were
Jenner.
talking about that before we went on tonight.
My early game mistake, I bought a Jenner. And I knew I should have bought a Mad Dog. And I bought that Jenner and had the first 60, 70 most awful games I've ever had. I dropped $50 on MC, used 4K of that MC to buy a Mad Dog, and was never happier. Should have bought the fucking Mad Dog.
See, that's why I kind of like your finish line reward objective suggestion, because the way the cadet bonus works now is you can make that mistake halfway through your cadet bonus because you finally want to own your own mech and you've got like 6 million in the bank, and you do what Satyr did, you go buy a Jenner because it's cheap, and then you don't realize that, oh wait, the XL engine is going to cost me twice as much as the actual mech does, and I don't have enough money to buy that.
I thought lights were cheap, and lights are not cheap. Lights are really
No.
expensive.
They're also one of the hardest mechs in the game to
Yep,
pilot
because you
properly.
should start as a heavy. And I figured that
Heavies
out
and
way too late.
mediums.
Level critical.
Heavies and mediums.
Yep, because light's the only way to play a light is to know who's going to kill you. And at that time,
So-
I didn't know who was going to kill me.
Destroyed.
So this goes to something I was actually thinking about, and this was an idea I had earlier this week, and it, those early mistakes, they can set you back a long time financially, simply because of all the ground you have to make up after the fact.
Target.
And I think a
Um,
lot of the complaints that, in regards to the quote-unquote grind in MechWarrior Online, come from players that have made those mistakes.
I know it took me, I kind of got lucky. My first mech I bought was a K2 catapult, and it actually worked out very well for me, and I have more games dropped in that mech than any other mech. I kind of got very lucky, but then, I screwed up, and I was selling things and then losing like half C-bills while having not owned it, and, stuff like that. What would you say to some kind of like early game constraint? And so this is things that happens in other games. Like you have to unlock the ability to do something by achieving something. Like you have to unlock the ability to be able to sell mechs, at some point because you achieved
Well,
something in game.
Target
Here's
acquired.
here's the thing: when it comes to the new player experience in MechWarrior Online, I'm a firm believer that there's no
Target
substitute for
destroyed.
just experience in playing the game,
Acquired.
because the learning curve is so steep sometimes in some of the different aspects of it. I think like I said, I think the whole cadet
Critical.
period and everything needs to be reworked from the bottom up.
And this is
Um,
something too, potentially, and I don't mean to cut you off, but just to go back to your unit point,
Destroyed.
because MechWarrior is a complicated game and how in-depth it is, and this is something else that units can contribute to new players and why they should be incentivized to seek them out, is there's a lot of collective knowledge sharing that if you're not in a unit or talk to someone, you may never actually stumble across on your own.
Yeah, and now here's my ideal cadet experience. If I were PTI, this is what I would have done years ago. If you want to separate the queues and actually help new players with separate and split queues, create a new player queue they're allowed to drop in during their cadet period. You vet different players within the community, give them a special special title of drill sergeant, whatever. Let them drop in that queue with the new players. Let them help explain the game, give tips, give that knowledge, give that advice to the new players while they're going through their cadet bonus. In order to incentivize that, then you give those players who are willing to dedicate and donate that kind of time to the community, give them a special title, badge, some cosmetic things, and maybe give them a special drill instructor mech that only they have access to, you know, and give them a monthly MC allotment. And for that, they have to log in and play X amount of hours
Oversight
per
is important
week
for
in that
this.
queue.
So how would you, so given that, that's a special thing. You got to be careful with stuff like that. How would you oversee that to make sure that you're not getting trolls?
You've got a community manager, right? Who, from what I can see, gets paid to stream MWO and occasionally tweet.
And play a pink Arctic cheetah, but let's not get
Yeah.
into that.
So, what is your community manager for?
You make a good point, sir.
That is a very good point. I have no counters to that.
I mean, but that's what I'm saying. They have the resources available to be able to do that. And if they
let me
really
ask
want to
you.
improve the new player experience, that's how you do it.
So let me ask you along those lines, because this may be the only counter I have to what you just suggested. From a solo person's perspective, do you really feel that there would be enough individuals that would actually want to drop and continually teach new players over and over and over again
There's people
the
like
mechanics in and out of this game?
I doubt. There's a lot of people like that.
I have the utmost faith in our community because I've been a part of this community for nearly 30 years, and I've seen this community build every part of community warfare that PGI is wanting to build, and I have seen this community, quote unquote, train and help new players for 30 years. I have no doubts that there would be more than enough people in this community to volunteer and donate and have good intentions of helping the community. So yeah, I think there would be more than enough. I think people would be knocking the door down to help out with that.
That's my only fear with your suggestion, is that the well would run dry, and that it would be a grind on whoever volunteered.
Across, and we talked a lot about units and their impact and their importance, basically, of a community, especially an online community. Look across the units. Don't you think, if that was true of the community, those units would have all dried up and left long ago?
See, like I
Well,
said,
but see,
I don't.
for the unit though, so this is why I kind of separate these two a little bit. From the unit mentality, it's a group perspective. This is entirely solo initiative, solo on solo initiative. There is no group motivator. Everything that a unit encourages you to do wouldn't exist in the suggestion you're saying. So it would entirely be self-motivating factors, and that's what I fear. You know,
I think
individuals
the players
are lazy.
that would be the ones volunteering for this would be from units.
Personally,
because they're the ones who care about the community.
I don't think that there would ever be. See, like I said, I don't think there's ever. I don't think I'm with him. I don't believe the well will ever run dry. As long as there's people around, they will do it. There are plenty of people to do it. My problem is simply with the quality of the people. I think I've heard the name before.
He is a player who runs a fairly large organized unit, and do you know what his whole goal is? He goes around to the various faction public TeamSpeak servers and such, and he tries to help set up new player channels and areas, and has experienced players that drop with him and your new players to help train them and explain the game.
Yeah, I have absolutely no doubt that we would have enough people. My only fear is the quality of those people and how to keep them in check from doing more damage.
Like I said, you've got a community manager. We have volunteer mods on the forums, right?
Yeah, the only thing with the community manager at that point, and I kind of agree with Sater's point, like you have to, for lack of a better term, you have to know the meta to manage the meta.
Yeah, and she doesn't, unfortunately. See, and this is something that I've said before, and I said it in private, but I'm gonna say it out loud. Personally, I think Sean Lang should be the community manager. I don't understand why he's not, because
He is the community manager.
he is to an extent, because I personally do not think Tina, as nice as the lady may be, I don't really know her, so I can't speak to her. But
Well, we're not talking about her personally.
Yeah, I'm not talking about it personally, but as a function of a community manager, Sean Lang is the community manager of this game, for better or worse. And
he has been ever since Nico was fired.
And so he should be given the title officially, and these are the types of things that he should be tasked to do, and or compensated for, because I mean, what's better than being paid to play robots and know the people that you play robots with? I'm sure he'd jump at the chance.
Hey, I'll tell you what. Give me, we'll say 40,000 a year, and a small expense budget. I'll be your community manager. I promise you, inside of a year, you'll have a much stronger community than you have now. Because I will happily sit here for 8-10 hours a day and let you pay me to play MechWarrior Online.
Mm-hmm.
And drop with guys like you and hold stream events, and yeah.
And these are all things that I believe, and so we're going to move on to this community manager topic, because this is something that I actually want to talk about. I believe that the community manager that we have now is not... See, somebody told me this before. Somebody said that the community manager doesn't necessarily have to be good or play the game to manage the community. And this is something that someone said, and I believe that it's wrong.
Yeah.
I think the community manager needs to be so in-depth into the game that it should be playing the game should be part of their job. And I don't see Tina's a pretty face, but I don't know what she does within the company other than the community management role, whatever she does at the company, whether maybe she's an artist on staff or something else. I don't know what else she does, but I don't see her as a community manager because I don't see her playing the game.
If you want to see a good example of what at least me personally feel is a good community manager, look at Star Citizen.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this too. I have looked at it a little bit too, but they have some very, very involved community managers.
Well, their lead community manager is always interacting with the community. Right now, Russ does more community managing than his community manager does on Twitter.
And Sean Lang also does more community managing than the community manager does.
Well, let's be correct. Russ does more tweeting than his community manager does.
But that's still more interaction with his community. Now, I hate the fact that they seem to ignore their forums and he uses Twitter, but on the flip side of that, he's very active on Twitter.
At least he's doing something.
He does respond to his community.
He is very active on Twitter, but one of our pilots has actually brought this up, and it's a very solid point, and this is what I'm going to bring up. Kinetics, one of our pilots brought up that because of the nature of Twitter and the fact that anyone can entertain any ideas and communicate with anyone else, Russ is communicating. Yes, I give him credit for that, but he's also getting, for lack of a better term, he's getting crap fed to him from people who don't actually know what they're talking about. And the fact that he entertains some of this information is actually worrisome to some of us.
It's also ignorance, because he doesn't really know who knows anything.
The other side of that is he's the president of the company. He shouldn't be the first line of communication.
The community manager should. And the community manager currently is not. And the closest person to having that level of information is Sean Lang. So as far as I can see.
Why is it that Sean Lang isn't more active on the forums within our faction
because it's not his job, and it should be.
It's not his job. And I'll be honest with you, I don't even know that, specifically speaking community warfare, that community warfare is even something that he entertains.
Well, from what I know...
This goes back to we're a community, we're going to be playing this game, like it or not. Some of the things we're going to have to do ourselves. The community is going to have to take a little ownership as well.
Maybe if we speak loud enough, if we speak loud enough, eventually maybe our voice will be heard and we'll actually get an avenue, you know.
And that's exactly why I'm encouraging these roundtables and more activity on the forums and the players in general, not just factions, not just units and stuff, but the players in general getting a little more organized. And you know what? If you think your community is crappy, then self-police it. Tell the jackass on the other side of the comms to shut up or hit the report button. Stop hitting clickbait threads on the forums and supporting that crap. Hold, you know, meaningful discussions, talk about something constructive. The community is going to have to take a little bit of ownership of that as well.
Online. Weapons online.
All right. Well, I think that's actually probably about everything we're going to talk about tonight. It's about time to cut this because we're not going to do another 3 hour like we did on our first one. But we do want to thank Sandpit for stopping by and giving us his ideas.
I'd really like to. I really appreciate Sandpit coming on because honestly, he's given me the perspective of a much smaller unit in an area of the map that we don't encounter almost at all. And I think it's really important that we get what he has set out because I think it's super important.
Well, I personally, I love what you guys are doing with the roundtables and stuff, and I think that this is how, and things like this in the communication within the community are going to be how we, you know, if we want to improve it, a lot of it's just going to come down to how we treat each other.
Well, we want to thank you for stopping by, and I think that's probably going to wrap up our broadcast. Do a couple quick announcements. Please pay attention to Satyrs and FBJ stream. We have the Merc tournament currently progressing. I believe that have the 12v12 started. FBJ, is that what's started, or is it the 1v1s?
12v12s have been going on. 1v1s, I think we're rescheduling them
For a month from now. We'll have the exact dates, but they're going to be within. They're going to be next month.
Okay. Due to overlapping conflicts, is that what we're pushing those out a little bit?
I think Antonius is just more comfortable with a little bit. He's trying to organize it a little bit more.
A little bit longer to set them up.
New target
Yeah.
acquired.
Okay, so please pay attention to Satyrs and FBJ streams. We're bringing you the 12v12 matches as they progress. In the ladder system, remember this is for MS charity, multiple sclerosis charity event. So please pay attention to that in future broadcasts. And I believe that's probably going to about do it for us tonight.
Awesome. Thank you guys again for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandpit, for
Thank you,
coming by.
Sandpit, for coming.